so that everyone knows who everybody else is. Most of us know each other, but Linda, would you like to quickly start?
Yes, of course. Hello, everybody. My name is Linda Middleton-Jones. I am the founder and managing director of International Trade Matters, a company based in Devon, within the region, but working with companies in accessing markets across the world, right through to documentary compliance and authorizations. I have another hat in which I have a post with the Institute of Export, where I am the chairman of the academic board. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Nigel Bell, I'm with a refrigeration company, the CEO and chairman, but I have a background working for Shell as a multinational, and then for a joint venture with Exxon, and then with smaller SMEs and a venture capital.
Thank you, Nigel. Marcus?
Yes, hello. I'm Marcus Broix of Trade with Europe, and we basically build bridges for UK companies to the EU, and we provide incorporation in the EU and anything to stay compliant with trading with the EU, and we also provide business solutions to distribute and sell your products and services.
Richard?
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Richard Lowe from Hewlett Rand. I wear two hats. One is I'm a sort of exporter of training and e-learning services into the China market. The other hat is I am a director of the China Bureau, which is a not-for-profit organisation helping to connect Southwest businesses into the China market. That's a non-for-profit. It's a membership organisation of which Roger is a member, and that's me.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'm Roger Mackrill, CEO and founder of Sabre UK Limited. We've been in operation since 2007, and we facilitate companies who wish to develop business potential in China and India, whether it's exporting or importing or setting up joint ventures or relationships. We've been doing that for the last 12 years. There we all are. Well, welcome. I should just say a little bit about this morning. We had a very interesting forum. I think those who were on the forum found it quite stimulating in the discussion we had. And looking at the top tips coming out of the panel members, they do very much integrate into the sort of thinking and discussion we had this morning. And basically what came out of this morning was who was available and what's available for SMEs. And obviously looking at the risks and opportunities that they face in international trade as well as the domestic trade. So I think without any further ado, we'll have a look at seeing what the views are of the panel members, and perhaps Nigel, you'd like to start with your views and the top tips that you'd like to give SMEs for entering into international trade market.
Yeah, mine are a little general probably, and some of them are copied by others, but the first one was, and do you want to do all four of the tips, Roger?
I think you talk them through, and then
okay.
The panel members can come in if they wish. And I don't know how many have we got in the audience, Louise?
Was there 6 panel members? So there's 4, 1, 2, 6, 4. Was it 7 panel members or 6? I can't remember.
5.
5. Okay. So there's 11 on the screen.
Okay.
You've got Eva, Humphrey.
Just to make.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Just to make a point, any questions that you may have from the people watching the event, please signal that you'd like to talk to one of the panel members or raise an issue that you'd like to have some discussions on or pointers on. How do we do that, Linda? Were they, Louise, did they put their hand up? Or?
Yeah, I was about to say, if everyone mutes themselves while the other person is speaking, you've got your chat box, which I've already said, put your contact details and anything else. You can also put questions in there if someone's on full flow, and we can go and revisit them. Or if you want to raise your hand, or if you go to the reaction button down the end, you can sort of put hand up or put a, and that'll get your attention. You can even, if you're having a whale of a time, you can go like that. So anyway, I've made you co-host now, Roger. I will keep an eye on just in case anyone comes in, but I'll leave it to you now, all right?
Very lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, Nigel, sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. So the first one is about culture. And my sort of basic message is that culture is different in most countries. And it's very unlikely that you really understand the culture through frequent visits. And you need to recognize that fact. I've lived in a few countries, but Philippines is one to mention, where you get an amazing blend of the Asian, the Spanish, the American. They avoid conflict. They don't want to give bad news. But when conflict comes, they erupt. And they can erupt very, very much. I had a professional finance manager working in a multinational company hovering at my door to talk about a bad debt. Didn't want to give that bad news. And you have to recognize that difference. The other one I would say is with the US citizens, when you hear them talk, generally they speak very fluently compared with the average UK citizen, and you can be really unsure of their abilities, and they're often not as great as they perceive. And it's a difference in the way that they have been brought up and the culture in that country. So my advice is, don't think you understand the culture. Always when you're making big decisions locally, try and get some local views on how that decision or action will be perceived. That's the first one. The second one, which I know somebody else has, very obvious, make a thorough and realistic assessment of the need for your particular products in the target market, however great they are. We sell totally innovative products which everybody should love. They don't always love them. And Roger will recognize that the best beef sauce that you've got will not sell well in India. That's a reality. So you need to recognize that, try and gain deeper knowledge by visiting trade shows, associations, talking to the customers. Quite often it's a price issue. So you look at options like cheaper models, make it locally, or you decide not to go there, which can be a very good decision. But you have to make sure you have a real market for your product. My third one was about business ethics and really about contracts. And this is a broad generalization, but I've seen it work a lot. In the West, we like a contract. We take a long time. We work on the contract. We write it all down. And if you're going to do something other than the contract, you would normally review it. In the East, there is a more pragmatic approach. You write a contract, but it's about, how the business in the world is going. So one exchange could be, one example would be currency exchange. Unless you have a very specific element in your contract, in the West, we would assume that the pricing would be related to what you'd agreed. In the East, there's a pragmatic element. If the exchange rate has changed, obviously you didn't mean for that company to lose money. One way that I have found to assist that is to actually start either a contract or start the contract or have a side letter between the business partners that indicates what the intent is. Is it a partnership or is it a straight sale? Don't ever call it a partnership if it's not. But if it's a partnership and you're looking to operate together, it's best to set a contract out with that objective, and then you can work from there. And my last one was make sure you can communicate effectively. And I see we have translations in the room. You can waste a lot of time and money through poor communication, particularly when you're working remotely. If the language you're using is not the first language of the party you're working with, don't expect them, however well they speak it, to have understood everything. Need to check that all the time. And I would say written communication even as a confirmation of a telephone call or a video conference or whatever, is always worthwhile, because, and emails are also valuable because the individuals have more time to review the email, maybe even before they finish writing it, they share it with somebody. But you need to be very sure that the communication is right. So those are my 4 rather general points, Roger. Learned from very painful experiences to many years of working in different countries.
Thank you, Nigel. Are there any questions from the audience at all, or even from the panel members?
Maybe no questions, but I agree on every single point. And yeah. Definitely. And cultures are very, very different. Even if you go from Germany to the Netherlands, even if I travel from Bristol to rural Wales, which takes me 25 minutes, it is a different world.
You want to be careful of those Welsh people, Marcus. Said as a Welsh woman, so I've got a certain vested interest in that.
Yeah, I think the comment on understanding is very true. A lot of people who deal with India think the Indians speak English. Their English is very old English, and the understanding of our English is very different. So you can believe you've had some understanding, and they will nod their head and say fine, but they will totally mislead it sometimes. So yes, it's very important to make sure communications are effectively managed. Linda, would you like to join and put your views forward?
Was that me, Roger?
That's
yes.
you.
Okay, yes, of course, I'd be delighted to. Thank you very, very much. Please indicate, though, if my sound dips, and I'll raise my voice things. So I've got just 6 short ones, perhaps. So the first one, my is to sign up for government.uk updates. At this time, it's really, really important that we get the most up-to-date and relevant information that is available. And you can sign up to receive these issues. Then my second tip is about Incoterms 2020. And I would just like to express that ex-works is not considered useful for an international contract sale. It is a domestic sale, and therefore it is not necessary to have a customs declaration or any documents. You might want to help the buyer, but actually there is no obligations for this. So this is a really, really important thing. I would advise that companies create an export quotation template to avoid any confusion further down the line. And especially with what you've just talked about with the cultures and the language and understanding. So if you determine a full list of fields that include, but are not limited to, the Incoterm you're using, the HS code, any standards you've got, packaging that you're going to provide, and the labelling details, it will stand you in good stead for all of those hundreds of orders that are going to come through the door, and you're ready to be able to respond to them in an appropriate manner. I think it's important to map your current and future state aspirations against the global context. And this is something we talked about this morning. It's about finding the opportunities when we're in a state of crisis, almost, with COVID and Brexit and the humanitarian things that are going on, the health issues, and the whole raft of trade negotiations or trade wars, or free trade agreements. So making sense of that is really, really helpful in helping you to forecast opportunities for growth. I would also advocate that businesses learn how to use some business tools. We've all confident with SWOT, I'm sure, but Steeple is a really, really good secondary research method that you can use. So Steeple stands for looking at a new country and looking at their sociological status, their technological status, environmental, economic, political, legal, and the last one, which is equally as important, is ethical. How do they work in that country? And it's a good sort of sifting mechanism. Recognise that there are different providers of advice. So as well as the DIT, Chambers of Commerce and Institute of Export, FSB, etc., there are a number of independent advisors. And finally, look at funding options, because HMRC are offering funding at the moment for training in international trade, compliance and everything. And it's really, really important that we take advantage of that and companies can benefit. So there was quite a few there, Roger. I hope any questions?
Any questions at all?
And one for me, Linda. Could you just explain your ex-works point again?
Well, ex-works, the ICC, who have updated the Incoterms 2020, have recommended that for export contracts of sale, it should be from FCA through to DDP. Ex-works is very much a domestic sale because the buyer comes to your premises and picks up a box of goods at your gate, at your entrance. You have no further interest in that item, and therefore it is a domestic sale, not an international sale.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that point there, I just come in, sorry Linda, just to support you on that, is that no, insurance is the main consideration on ex-works to FCA, because once you're not even liable for loading the goods, so what happens when the lorry arrives, you go out to help to load the lorry, actually ex-works does not cover your company to actually load those goods into the back of the vehicle. So it's very, you have to be very clear exactly what your agreements are. Move away from ex-works for any international shipments. You may end up having to pay 20% VAT because you haven't got clear confirmation back from the buyer that they actually exported the goods. So you could be into a carousel situation where VAT is going to have to be requested by HMRC because you have no proof of export.
Mm. Interesting point, that. Interesting point. Phil, I wonder if you'd like to just put your points forward in terms of...
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Roger. Let me just introduce myself because I missed out first time around. That's okay. Yeah, my name's Phil Brook. I work for the DIT as a tech sector specialist and international trade advisor for the Southwest, covering everything from Gloucestershire, Swindon, Wiltshire and westwards. Currently, of course, working from home as everybody is. And with another hat, I'm also the Somerset representative for the China Bureau, the Bristol, West of England China Bureau that Richard has introduced briefly. So yeah, great interest in international trade to any region, but particularly China and the Middle East, where I've had a good deal of experience in my career. So yeah, top tips. Okay, well, I've kind of broken them down really into sort of strategic level and tactical level. I think from the strategic level, I would say one of the important things to do, and in COVID times, it's perhaps the only way of doing it, is to do as much desk research first in researching the best markets for your product or service. I think all too often companies just sort of go on gut feeling or a reaction to a situation, thinking, oh well, my product should work well in India, you know, but they don't really spend enough time doing some basic research. And I think it's that old analogy, time spent sharpening your axe now will save an awful lot of time and resource later. And now, of course, it's about all we can do because international travel is so problematic and difficult. But there are some great tools to help research your best market. Try and find the ones that have the best conditions for your product or service, and prioritize them, rank them. I hate to use these analogies, but find the ones that are the low-hanging fruit, the easiest ones to go for, and conversely, which ones are the most difficult ones. So I think spending time researching the market is really, really important. I would also say, from a strategic point of view, make sure before you make a decision to enter a particular market that your board is behind you. I've seen it all too often where an international sales manager approaches a new market, suddenly finds that conditions are a little bit different, as they will be. They'll always be different to what he expected, and maybe it's going to take more time or maybe more money or whatever, and he goes back to the board and they haven't got his back or her back, and you're then floating around in a no man's land. It's really, really difficult if your board is not behind you. So I think make sure that the board is really fully engaged in your decision making and supports you to the hilt. There are on that note, one of the hindrances can be with new markets that are, shall we say, a little bit more adventurous or challenging than normal. And there are organisations like our sister department, UKEF, United Kingdom Export Finance, who can help de-risk exports to certain countries, regions that you would otherwise consider too risky. So conversations with UKEF that basically can provide government guarantees to up to 80% of the order value can be very beneficial and help take this sting out of approaching new markets. So strategically, there are two points. On a tactical level, I think the points that have already been made are very, very important. The points made by Linda and Nigel and so on about making sure you've got your documentation compliance all sorted. It's really, really important come January the 1st to know what you have to have in place. So make sure that you know what the compliance procedures are, and make sure that your staff are adequately trained to deal with it. Customs declarations, really, really important. Make sure you've got a URI number with GB in front of it. It's really important. It should be issued automatically, I believe, but do check. And of course, then there are non-tariff barriers. It's not just documentary barriers and compliance. It's things like getting your IP in order. That is really, really important for certain countries, China being one of them, where it's a first to register system. You want to make sure before you even set foot in that country that you've got your IP as protected as you can be. Sometimes that doesn't involve patenting. That's not always the best approach, but you need to understand IP protection, trademark protection before you even have conversations in countries like China. Having said that, it used to be about the number one issue with British companies trading in China. It's now something like 15 on the list of concerns because China has gone a long, long way to get its IP act together. What else? Sorry, I don't want to rabbit on too long, but I think it's really, really important to understand that you need to whatever partnerships you form, whether it's distributors, agents, JVs, or whatever, you need to devote the time to nurture that relationship. Understand the culture, as has already been said, really, really important. You know, they will work hard for you if you work hard for them. If you don't show them the right level of attention and respect, then they're just going to favour one of your competitors probably. So really invest the time and resources to make sure your partners in market are fully supported. In terms of contracts with these partners, yeah, they're really, really important to have a contract that is sufficiently watertight to protect both interests. What I would say on that, and this really has come from a lawyer friend of mine, it's better to have a bad contract with a good partner rather than a good contract with a bad partner. Of course, it's even better to have a good contract with a good partner, but getting the right partner is really, really important, more important than the contract in many respects. Yeah, final thought, I would just like to echo the words of a business leader who's made a tremendous success of his business around the world on the basis that people around the world are much more alike than they are different. We've all got differences, our cultural differences, but essentially we're all the same. We all want the best for our families and children, and we essentially have the same needs and wants. So yeah, that's a bit of a long-winded way of giving you my top tips.
I think the other thing, Phil, that might be came across in your notes actually, and that is building trust with whoever you're dealing with is a key issue.
Yeah.
Without trust, business becomes very difficult.
It does indeed, yeah, and it doesn't matter what contract you've got, if the trust isn't there, it won't work. And that's got to be a two-way thing. And I think all too often UK companies expect everything to happen for them, but they don't put in enough time and effort into building the relationship. And with many cultures, it's really, really important to have that relationship built before you even discuss the business side of things. That's very true in the Middle East. It's also true in China. And you've got to build that trust. Otherwise, you really aren't going to get off on the right footing. I do agree.
As you say, that's the first step, is to build that trust. It starts long after you've had the initial discussions and learnt about each other's families.
Yeah, absolutely. And in these COVID times where everything is being done online, in some respects it's harder because you're not face to face, you're not in their country, and establishing that human relationship where the trust develops. On the other hand, it does save you an awful lot of legwork and time having meetings like this over Zoom, because you can filter down the field of potential candidates very, very quickly. But yeah, as soon as we're able to travel, we need to get out there face to face, particularly when you're just establishing a relationship.
Thank you, Phil.
No
Any questions for Phil?
Can I make some comments, please, on what you just said, if that's okay?
Sure.
First thing is on the EORI numbers and the EORI, in that the danger is for SMEs who are not VAT registered. So the ones that are VAT registered will be given automatically their number, but of course if they're not registered, then they have to apply, which is very, very easy and can do that. Secondly, that there's going to be another EORI number needed for trade with Northern Ireland, which SMEs who trade in that area need to be aware of. So that will start with XI. And the last thing I wanted to just touch on, Phil, you mentioned the importance of contracts of sale, which are imperative to get right. And just that there is a need the moment for companies who have contracts of sale with Europe, for those companies to revisit the contract and make sure that there is an arbitration clause in that contract. Now that is because arbitration is governed by the New York Convention and will apply post-Brexit. The current dispute resolution and jurisdiction that is within our contracts may change because of whether we have a deal or no deal and whether everything's ratified. So for safety reasons, it is better to review them now and make sure that there is an arbitration clause for the dispute if a dispute arises. So just adding to what you said, Phil, hope you don't mind.
No, absolutely. No, appreciate the extra insight. Very valuable points.
Yeah. Could I ask Richard, would you like to just put your thoughts forward, please? And then we have some questions coming in now. I'll pick those up.
I think it's a question of building on what everybody said, but so my tips, really, some of them have already been touched on. So obviously, I'm just going back. I think, I've worked for a US company. I've worked in Latin America. I've worked in Europe. And I've now worked in China, and I've got suppliers in India. So I do think there is something about, firstly, do you have something that others want to buy? Do you have something that others want to buy? The second thing is you need to build up some credibility because you need to be able to sell in those different cultures. So when you're selling to, the points that Nigel's made, at the very, very beginning here, the way that you will negotiate in the Far East is very different to the way that you probably will negotiate in Latin America. And, certainly what I've learned over the 7 years I've been, targeting the sort of China market is actually it starts off as a discussion. And, before you actually get into a discussion around doing any work, you've gone out, you've met people, you've gone out several times. I mean, I flew to China lots of times to meet, networks and contacts and the clients to get to a point where we started to talk about contracts. Whereas over in the UK, what I found is that obviously people have a need, you've got a service, the deal's done fairly quickly, but it takes a longer time in the Far East where they want to know who you are. They want to know who they're dealing with. So building the trust, building the relationship is a longer time lag. Times that by the amount of time that you're actually over in a country, you can see now that the export timeline of converting, work is much, much longer. So my point this morning about, plan for the long term is it's not a short term, it's not transactional. We have to think this is relational. We're building relationships with people. And we've got to get to a point where they want to contract with you. So that can start. So I'm working on something at the moment where we've ended up with a piece of paper where we're discussing various ideas. This is somebody in China, and it's all being formulated, but we've not signed anything, but we're using it as a discussion document. Are you with me? To get to a point where we can have a memorandum of understanding. And when we're at that point of a memorandum of understanding, that's where I think we'll then go into the contracting phase and all of that sort of stuff. But that's taken it's taken quite a few months to even get to this stage. So I think that would be one thing that probably to build on what Nigel has said at the beginning there. The second thing is about culture is we might be all human, we might be all the same, but actually we do have different perceptions culturally. For example, I didn't realize that the number 4 in China is a deeply suspicious number. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that 8 is a lucky number. I didn't realize that the color red is perceived very differently as we perceive it in the West. It's perceived as happy, jolly, whereas red's danger, gold is prosperity. Never put your chopsticks up in a dish because these are all cultural things that you have to learn along the way, because you could create a big faux pas in a relationship if you're not if you're not aware of those cultural nuances. I bought myself a tie that's in gold and red, incidentally, for when I travel to China. So, I mean, just little things like that. The way you present your card, your business card, all these sorts of subtleties. So I think the important point there is training and education. You know, really invest time. You know, the point that Phil was making about, you know, invest some time in your skills, in your knowledge. Read up, buy books about the culture, buy books about the environment. I bought some tiger heads, snake. Don't know. You might know the book. I can't remember the title now. But buy some textbooks about the country that you're going to visit. You know, do your homework before you get there. Learn off of people that are already trading in the country. So, you know, family, friends, other people who are exporting that are in your local area. You know, use your local networks, connect with the trade associations in country, chambers of commerce, etc., that are over there. They are a great help, as well as the local trade bodies that are very similar to the DIT over here. You know, the government institutions like Invest Hong Kong or Invest Guangzhou, or these are the sorts of ones that we connect with. So I'm really just building on what everybody's said, really, but trying to look at it from a sort of pragmatic perspective as opposed to anything else.
If I can sort of build on what you're saying, Richard, one of the things that no one's mentioned yet is, although you've said in for the long term, patience is an enormous asset in Asia compared to America, for example, where it's gang-ho and get the contract moving, whereas in Asia it is a long haul and you have to be very patient in your discussions. I think India was a very good example for a company I was dealing with in the medical healthcare side of business. We were talking with hospitals and the guy was getting very impatient. We've been into the same hospitals, I don't know, X number of times. Every time the meeting was late and it appeared we got nowhere. The ultimate result after nearly 14 months with that company was that they got a very large contract in India which doubled their turnover. But we had to teach him patience.
Yeah, I would just, if I can chip in there, I would just reiterate that point. Patience is essential in lots of markets. The Middle East is another one where you really do need patience because decisions do not happen quickly. And when they do happen, they'll want everything yesterday. So it can really wrong foot a lot of companies, and that comes back to the point I made about making sure your board is behind you. If you're pioneering a new market, if your board isn't prepared to give you the resources and the time to penetrate that market properly, then it's probably best not to go there in the first place. You really do need the buy-in from everyone in the company, anyone who's important, that is. China is really, really important. Middle East, I'm sure there are many other countries too. Mm-hmm. And the Americans, as you say, the Americans are not very good at it.
I mean, to build on that, I suppose it depends. If you're the sort of, you know, for me, it's very different. I sort of make my own decisions. But if you're going to, you need to put a business case to the board. You'll need to have a plan for the board. And I think, you know, the other question really is budget. Is that somewhere along the line you have to allocate a budget, some investment that you will hopefully get a return off. And you know, in the early days I didn't really allocate, but I now sort of know, you know, I now know what I'm spending each year in terms of my export efforts, if you see what I mean. So I think it's good to have an idea of how much you're spending.
Thank you, Richard. Marcus, perhaps coming back to the Brexit side more than overall trade, maybe you can bring out some comments on the Brexit side that you would recommend SMEs consider.
Yes, it would be a pleasure. Yeah, indeed, I have compiled a few Brexit-related, you know, some hands-on advice. So first of all, what I briefly mentioned this morning is the EU representative for data protection. And this is something that not many people are aware of, But if you are a UK business with an online presence but no branch office in the EU, and you are handling EU data, or basically data of EU persons, you need to be, you need an EU representative in order to be compliant with GDPR. So funnily enough, I just had in between these two talks a call from a company that handles a lot of personal data, because they deal with leadership and also assess employees and so on. So they handle very sensitive information, so they would need such a service, but not very many people are aware of this. So this would be my top tip number one. Now, my top tip number two is, again, I mentioned it this morning, do I need an EU presence? So in many cases, you would. For instance, if you sell products that bear the CE marking, the European quality mark, you will need an EU presence. Or if you sell products, say, via e-commerce in the EU, Amazon has just told their UK sellers they cannot sell goods for them that are destined for sale in the EU. So these companies need to establish a presence in the EU. And other companies also, for other various legal and economical reasons. And this EU presence comprises of two elements, and this is something that many people are not sure about either. So people who call here usually ask me for a virtual office address, or basically for a place of business in Europe, which we offer. But then I ask them what they need it for, and they say, well, I need this EU presence. And then I explain to them that they also need to incorporate in the EU. Yeah. So they need to establish a company, but fortunately there are services to outsource a company administration management service, basically. So you don't need to fully replicate what you have in the UK, but you need a company, you need a door that the authorities in the EU can knock on, and you need someone there, maybe even a virtual reception, and someone who can forward your mail in order to be operative to either keep up your EU trade or in fact grow your markets. Continuing with growing your markets, or basically maintaining your European markets, there are also possibilities of, if you sell goods into Europe, of keeping your stock in Europe, which might be a big advantage to have in stock in the UK, especially if that stock comes from outside the UK. Say you have an e-commerce business and the majority of your goods come either from the Far East or from the Far East and Europe. You would have to import these goods into the UK and then re-export them into the EU, possibly pay 2 times tariffs plus all the non-tariff barriers like doing all the documentation and so on. So you obviously be better off to keep your stock in the EU. And we identified the Netherlands as a very good country to use for your European distribution. And the reason is that they have a brilliant infrastructure. The whole system is geared up for it, also legally, and you have we have very competitive pricing. And if you do hold stock in the Netherlands, it's very easy to apply for VAT deferment, which means you import stuff from, say, China. You have it in in a Dutch warehouse, and this is similar to bonded warehouse. It's not, well, it is in the country, but you do not have to pay the VAT upon the sale of these goods. So that is a great help with cash flow. And talking about cash, this is my final tip: Euro bank account. If you would like to protect yourself against the possibility of the pound falling, and experts say the pound will fall after Brexit, or basically after next year, you can open a bank account with your UK bank. I think most banks offer that. You can open it most of the time free of charge. However, when you change your funds, your sterling into euros, I would advise not to do this through the bank. I would advise to do this through currency exchange agents, FX agents, because they normally have a much cheaper rate of changing your pounds into euros than the banks. So, and the other, or another good way of, maybe you want to secure a price that you get on the current exchange rate, you can agree a so-called forward contract with the exchange agent, with your FX agent. He will then guarantee that price for maybe up to a year, so you have a guaranteed price, at the expense that if the currency, the exchange rate changes in your favor, you'd still have to pay today's exchange rate. So, but at least it's secure for another year. So I think these are my 4 tips.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Thank you. Very useful.
Thanks.
We've got a question from Richard Young. Is he able to ask the question, or shall I read it out? Okay, I'll read it out. What, if anything, does the panel think are the specific challenges of exporting a service overseas, especially if offered online remotely, compared with exporting a product? And are there any useful sources of advice? Phil, would you like to start with that?
Yeah, so I guess he's talking about a digitally delivered service here. And I think, well, if it's going to be within the EU, I think everything that Marcus has just said needs to be taken very carefully into account. I fully endorse everything he said there. Delivering a service digitally elsewhere, outside the EU, what are the challenges? Well, I think he needs to get advice for his specific sector, because the rules and regulations will differ in different parts of the world. I know in North America, for instance, in the States, it can differ from state to state, and you need very specific advice from organizations like International Trade Matters, like the DIT, like the Chambers of Commerce, all the organizations that we're talking about today. Yeah, GDPR is obviously a major issue that has to be taken extremely seriously. Without knowing more about the company, it's difficult to say anything other than great generalizations. But I think look at the VAT, look at the rules and regulations in all the markets that he's servicing at the moment, and take great note of them, because you can. It's easy to think of it being just one easy sale to anywhere in the world, but you can come unstuck, and you don't want to get into trouble, particularly in countries like the States, or indeed in places in the Far East as well.
Linda, did you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Roger. And I agree with Phil. It's quite difficult. I think there are a number of things. One, I think our service sector is second to none. I think that we have great advantages.
Linda,
Have I gone quiet again? Is that better?
That's better. You're breaking up.
Okay. So I think the service industry in the UK is second to none. I think that we have great advantages in just being British, but equally because of how we have developed and are innovating constantly, so that we are in demand across the world. So that's the first thing. I also think there's a difference between being a reactive exporter and a proactive exporter, whether that's in goods or services. So reactive, yeah, things are going to come in if you've got a website, and people will find you from around the world. And very much then you're going to have to think, well, how am I going to do this? I need to take advice. What are the regulations? Where am I going to, have any barriers, or how am I going to do this? I would advise that all service industries look at becoming proactive exporters and approaching companies, because then they can do their research to start and know what is expected of them in a certain market. And if they target a market, even better, because they can really get under the skin and look at and the language and just all of those things, colour and language that we've heard before. And one final point, I think it's really, really important for service industries to recognise where the free trade agreements are. What are we doing as a country, and who are we linking up with? So my advice would be, look at Japan right now, because they're friendly to us, because they've signed an agreement with us. And that gives some indication of how service industries will be accepted as part of the whole deal. So those are just my comments on possibly what you might want to do.
Okay. What else wants to comment?
I would also just add that translation is really, really important. Don't rely, as a lot of companies do, on just advertising themselves online in English or having some bad Google Translate pages up there. There's nothing worse, to be honest. So make sure that you have whatever languages are appropriate to your product, your company. Make sure you have good quality translation. I think it's really, really important. It irks us when we're reading bad instructions in badly written English for some bit of furniture we're putting together, whatever. And that's equally valid for people abroad when they're reading a bad translation and they don't quite understand what you're getting at. And I would also say that also applies to the States. If you're exporting to the States, you need to be in American English. They won't understand a lot of the terms and words that we use, even though we gave them the language in the first place. They won't understand it, or they'll get it wrong. And so, if you're selling to the States, have American English as well as British English.
I think.
May I just? Sorry.
Make that point with you that making sure you've translated your website and any other information correctly is absolutely paramount importance. Misunderstandings come through very quickly, and it turns people off very quickly if it's not clear in the language that they understand. And particularly, as you say, in America, China and India, very much so. You need to have it in the language and in the style that they understand.
May I just add to what Phil said there, and also what you said? I find that wording, also translation, is always a marketing tool as well as images, because the viewer will judge on the quality of your text, of your copy, and the quality of your images or film. And he will associate this with the quality of the services or goods you offer. So if it's a badly made website, he will definitely not buy off you. So the language has to appeal to him, and this is the work of a good translator. I think Eva will agree. That's what she lives off from, yeah. And also good images. It just has to be right. One other point about selling financial services into Europe, you do need a so-called financial passport, which means you need to incorporate in the EU if you want to sell financial services.
I also add the point about, it's like China. When we went to China, there is the social language and then there's the business language. So, you may have translation, but if you're using translators like Eva, I'm sure that she's good at both. But there is, what are you selling and how does the style of the language, what's the audience? Is it a business language? Is it a consumer audience? So there will be different people who have expertises in some of those areas, or both, like probably Eva. Just hedge my bets there. The other thing is about talk to your professional advisors when you're selling any service to see what's applicable. So your accountant as well can do some research for you about, whether it's vatable, etc., etc., etc. So I would advise this is where you need professional support around you when going in country. So, pay for some services, get somebody to do some work for you.
Thank you, Richard. Any other questions from the audience at all?
If I can just make a statement, Roger, we've forgotten about our customers in Europe. No, we're talking about our issues with moving to the end of transition. Our customers in Europe are trying to understand how they receive goods, how they receive services in the future from the UK. So we very much need to support them, not just look at ourselves, but if we do, we need to sometimes really look after our customer, or else we're going to lose them. And my main concern is, don't be negative towards the customer that should know what they're doing in Europe or how to get our goods. No, we should help them, even though it's going to add additional cost, but assist them so we don't lose business in the future.
Very, very true point. Any other questions or points that people wish to raise at all? Okay, well, we've run for an hour. We allowed an hour and a half, so I think it's a very interesting discussion. Certainly, from some of the comments we've had on the chat line, I think there's been a good response from the people who are here. We will send out the chat details, and we will send a recording of this event. If the panel members would like to have a copy, let me know, and that will offer an opportunity to remind us exactly what points were raised and so forth. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time, and look forward to the Brexit moving, and more importantly, in my terms, actually seeing international trade developing in both directions in and out of the UK. Thank you very much.